Welcome. This is South Carolina Social Studies Standard 8.5-2, dealing with the economic impact of Reconstruction on different groups of people. South Carolina Social Studies Standard 8.5-2 is describe the economic impact of Reconstruction on South Carolinians in each of the various social classes. Essential questions. What was the economic impact of Reconstruction on South Carolinians in each of the various social classes? How did it impact the rich, poor, minorities, genders, and ages? Reconstruction policy had little economic impact on the South's recovery from the devastation of the Civil War. The economy continued to rest on agriculture and cotton, but now depended on sharecropping rather than slave labor. So sharecropping replaced slave labor. The national government did not see its role as taking an active hand in managing the economy until the 20th century, as so the national government did not rebuild the war-torn region economically. So there was a lot of destruction, and the national government again did not rebuild this region economically. The South remained in a state of economic depression well into the 20th century. Think about what an economic depression is. And if you don't know, you know what to do. As a result of the war and the 13th Amendment, plantation owners lost their labor force and a very large part of their wealth. Many were astonished that their former slaves, who they thought were loyal to them, left the plantations. Feeling betrayed and resentful of the former slaves' attitudes, many became more hostile to the freedmen. Now they were forced to perform all of the normal household and farm duties themselves or pay their workers. But their investments in Confederate dollars were worthless. All they had was the land, which is important. They still had the land. Facilitated by the Freedmen's Bureau, many entered into sharecropping with freedmen and reestablished their former position as master through a new means. So sharecropping, again, is not a good form of economic labor. It's not a good form of economy because it is sort of a slave type labor, but we'll see more of that later. Sharecroppers tilled the land that belonged to their former slave masters in exchange for a share of the crop. Although the planter elite tried to hold on to slave-like conditions through the black codes and control over the government of the state through the Constitution of 1865, Congressional Reconstruction brought a temporary end to their political control in South Carolina. However, plantation owners and the middle class engaged in violence and intimidation against African Americans throughout Reconstruction. So again, they got a share of the crop. So that's not saying that the person that gave them the share of the crop did it in a fair manner, but they just got a share of the crop. And we'll find out more about that in a moment. Threats, labor, and scalawags. Small farmers who had not owned slaves were not directly affected financially by their liberation. However, now they had to compete with African American sharecroppers when they marketed their crops. Many who had felt a sense of social superiority to slaves now felt that superiority was threatened. So they felt like they were better than the slaves, but now the slaves are free, so they're feeling a little threatened. They reacted with anger and resentment and joined the ranks of vigilante groups that terrorized African Americans. Some small farmers from non-slaveholding districts cooperated with the Republicans because they would benefit from the educational and economic opportunities they offered. They were called scalawags by other South Carolinians. So again, not only were African Americans suffering or being mistreated, but these were also Republicans from non-slaveholding districts that were being ostracized by South Carolinians. Freedmen. Freedmen were both liberated and displaced in the Reconstruction period. So if you don't know what displaced means you're out of place, you're out of joint, you're not necessarily where you have been. And you're liberated, that means you've been set free. At the end of the war, many freedmen left the plantation looking for relatives sold down the river or seeking a taste of freedom. So a lot of people went to find their family members. Think about Django when he went to find his wife. Of course, that was not pre-emancipation. That was pre-emancipation. It wasn't post, but he still wanted to go find his wife. Most soon returned to the area that they knew best, their former plantations. It is a common misconception that former slaves left the South as soon as they had the opportunity to escape the society that had mistreated them. With the assistance of the Freedmen's Bureau and their own determination, they worked to consolidate their families and secure their own land to farm. Many African Americans entered into agreements with Southern landowners who were both land rich and cash poor. In sharecropping, the landowner supplied the seed, tools, and land, and the sharecropper supplied the labor. Both then shared the crop that was produced. Although the sharecropper was able to move away from the old slave quarters, the sharecropper remained economically dependent on the landowner. In bad years, the crop share might might have been very little, and sharecroppers would have to take out a loan in the form of a lien on next year's crop to buy supplies until until the next harvest. So they'd have to get a lien or take out a loan against a crop that they don't even know is going to actually happen, because anything can happen. You can have frost, it could snow, the boll weevil could come, kudzu could grow. It's just, they didn't know, but they took out loans anyway on the next year's crop. So the crop lien system placed the sharecropper in a cycle of debt and dependence on the landowner and the lien holder. So if you owe the landowner money, you couldn't get out of your contract because you still owed him. If you took out a loan on next year's crop, you owed the lien holder. So you still had to sharecrop the next year. So it was an endless cycle of debt and dependence, right? Although African Americans suffered from white violence and intimidation throughout the Reconstruction period, they continued to claim equal citizenship and carve out as much independence as possible in their lives. And you will see this throughout history, that the African Americans were resilient. Women in Reconstruction. The impact on women of the Reconstruction period depended on their social class. Both the wives of elite plantation owners and small farmers shared their husbands' loss of social status and fear of economic competition from the freedmen. Elite white women had to negotiate household services from former slave women or perform household tasks themselves. So no longer did you have someone who had to do your housework. You had to negotiate a price if you wanted it done, or do it yourself. In addition, the large number of men killed and other physically and mentally impaired during the Civil War meant that many white women took on non-traditional roles. Former slaves or carpetbaggers and scalawags pushed for some women's rights. As a result of the Constitution of 1868, women achieved some rights, including the right to own property after marriage. Again, a lot of rights that we know of now, that, I have the right to have my own apartment, I can buy my own car, I don't have to have a man to buy land. Those are things that did not exist back then. So you can't think about it in terms of 2016. Think back to 1868, when women, the only thing you could do was get married. Okay? Northern immigrants, or people from other countries, both men and women, came to South Carolina as teachers, missionaries, or entrepreneurs. Some came as Union soldiers and stayed. Reviled as carpetbaggers, because their bags looked like they were made out of carpet, they were not accepted by most of white South Carolina society. Some found political opportunity in the Reconstruction government, while others found economic opportunity.